66 million years ago, on what began as an ordinary morning, the most successful animals to ever walk the surface of this earth woke up. They had ruled this planet for 165 million years. To put that into perspective, our own species, Homo sapiens, has existed for roughly 300,000 years. The dinosaurs had been here 550 times longer than us. They had survived the slow breaking apart of Pangaea, the supercontinent, as it fractured and drifted across hundreds of millions of years. They had endured volcanic winters, dramatic shifts in sea level, and the gradual transformation of the atmosphere itself. They had evolved into forms almost beyond imagination, creatures 60 meters long, predators with jaws powerful enough to crush bone like paper, giants that shook the ground with each step. They had filled every ecological niche on every continent. They flew, they swam, they burrowed. Nothing in the entire 4 billion-year history of life on Earth had ever come close to stopping them. But on this particular morning, something was already on its way. Something that had been traveling for billions of years. A rock, 12 kilometers wide, moving at 70,000 kilometers per hour through the darkness of space. It had the Yucatan Peninsula in its path, and it would arrive in approximately 16 hours. To truly understand what was lost on that day, we first need to spend time in the world that existed before it. The late Cretaceous period, the final chapter of the Mesozoic era, was not a world in decline. It was not a world already dying. It was, by every scientific measure, a world at the absolute peak of its richness and diversity. The climate was warmer than today, perhaps 6 to 10 degrees Celsius higher on average. There were no polar ice caps. Sea levels were dramatically higher, and shallow inland seas covered much of what is now the interior of the continents. The result was a world of extraordinary ecological variety, with vast tropical and subtropical environments stretching far further north and south than anything alive today. In what is now Western North America, a lush floodplain stretched along the eastern shore of the Rocky Mountains, a young mountain range still rising, its peaks draped in cloud. To the east, the western interior seaway glittered in the sun, home to mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, and fish in numbers almost impossible to imagine. The forests were unlike anything alive today. Magnolias and early flowering plants were beginning to dominate, having emerged only tens of millions of years before. Alongside them stood ancient conifers, ferns, and cycads, plants whose ancestors had existed since the Triassic. This was a landscape that had been shaped over hundreds of millions of years, layered with ecological complexity that our modern world has never quite recaptured. Moving through this landscape in enormous herds were the hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs. Edmontosaurus and Anatotitan roamed in groups of hundreds, perhaps thousands, grazing on low vegetation with teeth that were constantly being replaced throughout their lives, arranged in complex dental batteries of hundreds of individual teeth at a time. These were not small animals. A fully grown Edmontosaurus could reach 13 meters in length and weigh up to 4 metric tons, roughly the weight of a large African elephant. They moved with a low, sweeping gait, their powerful tails helping to balance their front-heavy bodies as they fed. Further west, on the drier upland plains, Triceratops moved in smaller groups. The largest of the horned dinosaurs, the ceratopsians, Triceratops was built like a living tank. 3 horns, a massive bony frill extending behind its skull, and a body that could weigh up to 12 metric tons. Despite its fearsome appearance, It was entirely herbivorous, feeding on tough, low-growing vegetation with a powerful parrot-like beak designed to shear through the thickest stems. Recent research suggests Triceratops may have been one of the most numerous large dinosaurs in the late Cretaceous of North America, possibly because it was extraordinarily successful at exploiting vegetation that other dinosaurs could not efficiently consume. Alongside them, Ankylosaurus, the armored behemoth, whose entire dorsal surface was covered in bony plates called osteoderms, and whose tail ended in a massive club of fused bone, a weapon capable of shattering the leg bones of a predator with a single swing. Pachycephalosaurus, with its dome-shaped skull of solid bone up to 25 centimeters thick, used in head-butting contests with rivals. Parasaurolophus, the crested hadrosaur, whose hollow head crest may have functioned as a resonating chamber, allowing it to produce deep, resonant calls that could carry for miles across the floodplain. The skies above were ruled by the largest flying animals in Earth's history. Quetzalcoatlus northropi, named after the feathered serpent deity of Mesoamerican mythology, had a wingspan of up to 12 meters, roughly comparable to a modern F-16 fighter jet. Standing on the ground, it reached the height of a modern giraffe. It is still debated whether such an enormous animal could truly fly, or whether it spent more time striding across the landscape in search of prey. But recent biomechanical studies suggest it was indeed capable of sustained flight, possibly by launching itself into the air with a powerful leap from all four limbs. In the shallow inland sea, the mosasaurs held absolute dominion. Tylosaurus, perhaps the most formidable of all, reached lengths of up to 14 meters, its long, streamlined body propelled by a powerful tail fin. It fed on fish, turtles, plesiosaurs, and likely anything else it could catch. Its jaws bore 2 rows of teeth, one on the main jaw and a second row on the palate, ensuring that prey could not escape once seized. And presiding over the terrestrial world, the apex predator of the Cretaceous, Tyrannosaurus rex. It is difficult to overstate how perfectly engineered this animal was. A fully grown T-Rex stood 4 meters at the hip and reached lengths of 12 to 13 meters from snout to tail tip. It weighed between 8 and 14 metric tons. Estimates have varied as new specimens are found. It walked on 2 powerful hind legs, each foot bearing 3 forward-facing clawed toes capable of gripping and pinning prey. Its skull was massive, up to 1.5 meters long, and built not for speed of bite, but for crushing force. The teeth, up to 30 centimeters long, including the root, roughly the size and shape of a banana, were not designed for slicing, but for puncturing and gripping. The bite force of Tyrannosaurus rex has been estimated at up to 57,000 newtons, the most powerful bite of any land animal in Earth's history. Powerful enough to crush bone completely, extracting the rich marrow from inside. Its brain, while not large by mammalian standards, was well developed in the regions associated with smell and vision. Recent studies of T-Rex skull morphology suggest binocular vision comparable to modern hawks, ideal for judging distance and tracking moving prey. Its olfactory bulbs were proportionally enormous, suggesting a sense of smell capable of detecting prey from kilometers away. For years, paleontologists debated whether T-Rex was primarily a predator or a scavenger. The current scientific consensus is clear. It was an apex predator, actively hunting large prey. But, like most large predators today, it opportunistically scavenged when the opportunity arose. This is not weakness, it is intelligence. This was the world on the last morning. Rich, layered, ancient beyond comprehension. 66 million years in the making. None of it knew what was coming.
In the early 1980s,
Nobel Prize-winning physicist Luis Alvarez and his geologist son, Walter Alvarez, made a discovery that would reshape our understanding of Earth's history. While studying a thin layer of clay in the geological record at the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary, the precise geological moment when the non-avian dinosaurs disappeared, they found something unexpected. The clay layer was enriched with iridium at concentrations up to 600 times higher than normal. Iridium is extraordinarily rare in Earth's crust, but it is common in asteroids and comets. The Alvarez team proposed what seemed at the time like a radical hypothesis, that a massive asteroid or comet had struck the Earth at the end of the Cretaceous, and that this impact had caused the mass extinction. The scientific community was initially skeptical. Then, in 1991, the crater was found.
buried beneath the Yucatan Peninsula in southern Mexico
And the adjacent Gulf of Mexico, geologists identified a circular structure approximately 180 kilometers in diameter, one of the largest impact craters on the planet. It was named Chicxulub, after a small town near its center. Dating confirmed what the evidence demanded. The crater was exactly 66 million years old, formed at precisely the moment the dinosaurs disappeared from the fossil record. Since its discovery, the Chicxulub impact has become one of the most intensively studied geological events in history. Drill cores taken from the crater floor have revealed an extraordinary picture of what happened in the first minutes, hours, and years after impact.
The Chicxulub impactor was approximately 10 to 15 kilometers in diameter. The current best estimate is around 12 kilometers. For comparison, the island of Manhattan is about 22 kilometers long and 3 kilometers wide. It was traveling at a speed of between 20 and 70 kilometers per second relative to Earth. Most estimates suggest approximately 20 kilometers per second or 72,000 kilometers per hour. At this velocity, the journey from the Moon to Earth would take less than 6 hours. Based on drill core analysis of the crater's geology, scientists believe the impactor was a carbonaceous chondrite, a type of asteroid rich in carbon compounds and relatively rare minerals. It struck at an angle of approximately 60 degrees. Neither a perfectly vertical impact nor a shallow graze, but something in between. This angle, combined with the sulfur-rich limestone bedrock of the Yucatan, would prove catastrophic in ways that even a purely vertical impact might not have been. The timing was, in the most literal sense, the worst possible. The Yucatan's geological composition was uniquely suited to amplify the disaster. In the final hours before impact, any animals with sufficiently sensitive vision might have noticed a new star in the sky, one that grew perceptibly brighter hour by hour. There is no evidence that any dinosaur perceived it as a threat. Why would they? Nothing in 65 million years of evolutionary history had prepared them for this. The object entered the upper atmosphere at 9:41 in the morning, local time, based on geological analysis of the crater's asymmetry and the distribution of ejecta. This timing would prove significant. A morning impact meant that the ejecta plume would be distributed in a particular pattern across the globe, with the most severe immediate effects concentrated in the Americas and Europe. In the final seconds before contact, the asteroid was moving so fast that the air in front of it could not get out of the way. Instead, it was compressed, heated to temperatures exceeding those found on the surface of the Sun. The compressed air column became a torch, incinerating everything in a corridor thousands of kilometers long in the fraction of a second before the rock itself arrived. What followed the impact was not a single catastrophe. It was a sequence of 5 distinct cascading disasters, each one capable of triggering a mass extinction on its own, arriving one after another over minutes, hours, days, and years. Together, they ended the reign of the dinosaurs. The impact released energy equivalent to approximately 10 billion Hiroshima atomic bombs in a fraction of a second. The immediate effect was thermal. The impact vaporized both the asteroid and a significant portion of the Earth's crust at the impact site. This created a rapidly expanding plume of superheated gas, molten rock, and pulverized debris that was ejected at enormous velocity in all directions. Within minutes, this ejecta was raining back down on the far side of the planet. As the debris re-entered the atmosphere at high speed, it heated the air to temperatures exceeding 600 degrees Celsius, hot enough to ignite organic matter on contact. Across much of the globe, any animal exposed to the open sky during this thermal pulse would have experienced conditions comparable to being inside a conventional oven. The effect lasted for approximately 1 to 2 hours after impact, before the ejecta layer dispersed. Fossils from sites in North America close to the impact have shown evidence of animals that died in the thermal pulse. Their bodies carbonized, their bones shattered by the heat. Sites further away show the beginning of massive wildfire layers in the geological record, just above the iridium boundary. The impact transferred an enormous amount of kinetic energy directly into the Earth's crust. The seismic event triggered by the Chicxulub impact has been estimated at a magnitude of approximately 11, far beyond anything recorded in human history. The largest earthquake ever recorded by modern instruments, the 1960 Valdivia earthquake in Chile, registered a magnitude of 9.5. A magnitude 11 event releases roughly 1,000 times more energy. The shock wave traveled through the Earth's crust at the speed of sound in rock, roughly 6 to 8 kilometers per second. It circled the globe multiple times, triggering secondary earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and landslides on every continent. Geological evidence shows massive disruptions in sediment layers across the globe at the exact Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary. Layers of mixed and tumbled rock that record the passing of the shockwave like a frozen moment of chaos. The impact occurred in relatively shallow coastal water, perhaps 100 meters deep at the impact site. The displacement of water was immediate and catastrophic. Mega tsunamis, waves with initial heights estimated at between 1 and 5 kilometers, radiated outward from the impact site in all directions. By the time these waves reached the open ocean, they had reduced in height but increased in wavelength, becoming long-period waves capable of traveling enormous distances without losing energy. Geological evidence from coastal formations in Texas, Alabama, and the Caribbean shows massive tsunami deposits at the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary. Layers of mixed marine and terrestrial sediment, sometimes hundreds of meters thick, that record the passage of these waves as they swept deep inland. The Gulf of Mexico was effectively drained and refilled multiple times in the hours after impact. Coastal ecosystems that had taken millions of years to develop were erased in minutes. The thermal pulse from the returning ejecta ignited wildfires across every continent simultaneously. The scale of these fires is still debated among scientists. Some models suggest that the fires were so widespread that they consumed the majority of terrestrial biomass in the northern hemisphere within weeks of the impact. Others argue that the fires, while extensive, were more patchy, with some regions escaping the worst effects due to local moisture conditions. What is not debated is the evidence in the geological record. The iridium layer that marks the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary is accompanied, at sites around the world, by a layer of soot, microscopic carbon particles from burned organic material. The quantity of this soot suggests fires of truly continental scale. The smoke from these fires joined the ejecta already in the upper atmosphere, contributing to what would become the most destructive long-term consequence of the impact. This was the killing blow, not the fire, not the tsunami, not the shockwave. The impact vaporized billions of tons of sulfur-rich limestone bedrock from the Yucatan's geological formation, the same limestone that had made the impact so deadly by enriching the ejecta plume with sulfate aerosols. Combined with the ash and soot from the global wildfires, this created a dense atmospheric layer that blocked incoming sunlight with extraordinary efficiency. Models based on drill core data from the Chicxulub crater suggest that the initial atmospheric opacity may have reduced sunlight reaching the Earth's surface to less than 1% of normal levels, comparable to a prolonged overcast day, but sustained for months. Global temperatures began falling within weeks. The estimates vary, but the scientific consensus suggests a global average temperature drop of between 10 and 15 degrees Celsius, possibly more at higher latitudes. This was the impact winter, and it lasted, in its most severe form, for approximately 2 to 3 years. The impact itself was catastrophic. But what followed was, in many ways, the more complete destruction, because what followed was not measured in hours or days. It was measured in years. Photosynthesis, the process by which plants use sunlight to convert carbon dioxide and water into sugars, is the foundation of almost every food chain on Earth. When sunlight was blocked by the impact winter, photosynthesis effectively ceased across most of the planet. Not everywhere, and not all at once, but broadly and comprehensively enough to trigger a collapse in primary productivity that cascaded through every ecosystem. Plants began dying within weeks. Not all plants, and not all at once. Seeds could survive in the soil for years, waiting for conditions to improve. But the living, photosynthesizing vegetation that sustained the enormous herbivore populations of the Cretaceous began to fail almost immediately. Phytoplankton in the ocean, microscopic photosynthetic organisms that form the base of marine food chains, collapsed in the surface waters. The marine ecosystem, already disrupted by the tsunamis and the acidification of surface waters from dissolved sulfuric acid, began its own cascading failure. Without sufficient plant matter, the great herbivores of the Cretaceous began to starve. The hadrosaurs, animals whose herds had numbered in the hundreds just weeks before, found nothing to eat. The cycads and ferns they had fed on for their entire lives were dead or dying. The seeds buried in the soil would not germinate in the cold and darkness. The large herbivores were the first to go because they required the most food. A triceratops needed perhaps several hundred kilograms of plant matter per day to sustain its 12 metric ton body. With vegetation failing, this was simply impossible. Smaller herbivores lasted longer, but not significantly so. The food was gone. Without herbivores, the carnivores had nothing to hunt. Even Tyrannosaurus rex, the apex predator of the most successful lineage of animals in Earth's history, could not survive in a world with no prey. A fully grown T-Rex needed enormous quantities of meat to sustain itself. With the large herbivores dying off, there was simply not enough food to support populations of large predators. The smaller carnivores fared somewhat better in the short term. Dromaeosaurids, the group that includes Velociraptor and its relatives, could survive on smaller prey: insects, small mammals, carrion. But even these animals were ultimately dependent on a functioning food web. Across the planet, over months and years, the great dinosaur dynasties collapsed. Species that had existed for tens of millions of years vanished from the fossil record in a geological instant. A thin boundary of clay and ash that, if you held it in your hand, would be barely a centimeter thick. In the oceans, the destruction was equally comprehensive. The collapse of phytoplankton removed the base of the marine food chain. Ammonites, the shelled cephalopods that had existed since the Devonian period and had survived every previous mass extinction, disappeared entirely. Marine reptiles, including the mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, vanished. Many species of fish went extinct. The oceans also acidified as the sulfuric acid from the impact dissolved in seawater, disrupting the carbonate chemistry that shell-forming organisms depended on. This was, in effect, a simultaneous assault on marine life from multiple directions at once. In total, it is estimated that the Chicxulub impact caused the extinction of approximately 75% of all species on Earth, both terrestrial and marine. 165 million years of dinosaur evolution gone. This is not only a story of extinction, it is also, perhaps more importantly, a story of survival. Because something did survive. Many things survived. And understanding why they survived, while the dinosaurs did not, tells us something profound about the nature of resilience and about the strange logic of mass extinctions. Across the various groups of animals that survived the Chicxulub impact, certain patterns emerge. Small body size was a significant advantage. Small animals require less food to survive, can exploit a wider range of food sources, and can shelter in microenvironments that buffer them from temperature extremes. In a world where large quantities of food have suddenly vanished, being small is not a limitation. It is a profound advantage. Metabolic flexibility was equally important. Animals capable of surviving on a wide range of food sources, insects, seeds, roots, fungi, carrion, were far better positioned than obligate specialists. The impact winter destroyed entire categories of food. Generalists were far better positioned than specialists. The ability to enter states of reduced metabolic activity, hibernation, torpor, or estivation, allowed some animals to survive periods when food was entirely unavailable. A crocodilian, for example, can survive for over a year without eating by dramatically reducing its metabolic rate. Among the most significant survivors were the early mammals. At the end of the Cretaceous, mammals were, in general, small. Most were no larger than a modern rat or shrew. They had been constrained to small body sizes throughout the Mesozoic, likely by competitive pressure from the dinosaurs that had dominated every large-bodied ecological niche. But their small size, combined with their likely nocturnal habits, their omnivorous diets, and their ability to burrow underground, made them extraordinarily well-suited to survive the impact winter. In the geological record, we see the mammals persisting across the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary. And then, in the millions of years that followed, undergoing one of the most explosive evolutionary radiations in the history of life. With the dinosaurs gone, the ecological niches they had occupied for 165 million years were suddenly empty. Mammals filled them, diversifying rapidly into the horses, elephants, whales, bats, primates, and tens of thousands of other species that populate the world today.
Crocodilians, the ancestors of modern crocodiles and alligators, survived the impact largely intact. Their survival is, in some ways, counterintuitive. They are large animals, larger than most of the mammals that survived, but they possess several characteristics that gave them an edge. Crocodilians are ectothermic. They do not generate their own body heat, but rely on external heat sources. This means their metabolic requirements are dramatically lower than those of similarly sized warm-blooded animals. A large crocodile can survive for over a year without eating if temperatures are sufficiently cool to keep its metabolism suppressed. They are also remarkably flexible predators, capable of surviving on almost anything: fish, carrion, insects, plant matter in emergencies. In a world where food has become scarce and unpredictable, this flexibility is enormously valuable. Finally, crocodilians are semi-aquatic animals whose eggs are protected by nest mounds and parental care, and whose young can feed independently from a very early age. This reproductive strategy proved more resilient than that of many dinosaurs, whose nesting behavior and dependence on large food resources made reproduction in a post-impact world extraordinarily difficult. Various reptile groups survived with remarkable success. Turtles, whose lineage extends back to the Triassic, predating even the dinosaurs, survived by retreating into rivers, lakes, and ocean sediments, where they could survive on minimal food and oxygen for extended periods. Their shells provided physical protection. Their low metabolic rates gave them time. Many lizard lineages survived as well, particularly those like the ancestors of modern geckos and skinks that were small, insectivorous, and capable of sheltering in rock crevices and soil. The insects they preyed on were among the more resilient groups, capable of surviving on fungal matter and decaying organic material even when fresh plant matter was unavailable. And then there were the birds. Modern birds are not merely related to dinosaurs, they are dinosaurs. Specifically, they are a lineage of theropods that evolved from the same group as Velociraptor and T-Rex. Throughout the Cretaceous, numerous lineages of avian dinosaurs existed, some with teeth, some without, some capable of strong flight, others primarily terrestrial. The mass extinction eliminated most of them, but one lineage survived. The neornithines, the ancestors of all modern birds, made it through the impact winter. The exact reasons for their survival remain a subject of active research, but several factors are likely significant. Early birds were small, benefiting from the same size advantage as the mammals. They were highly mobile, capable of covering vast distances in search of food. And crucially, the ancestors of modern birds appear to have been primarily seed eaters, and seeds can survive in the soil for years, even in harsh conditions. In a world where the forests had burned and most vegetation had died, seeds buried in the soil represented a food source that persisted long after everything else had gone. The birds that could find and process these seeds had an extraordinary advantage. From this single surviving lineage, in the millions of years that followed, would emerge over 10,000 species, every bird alive on Earth today. The sparrow at your window, the eagle over the mountain, the penguin in the Antarctic, the hummingbird in your garden, all of them are living dinosaurs. The lineage did not end 66 million years ago. It adapted, endured, and diversified into the most species-rich group of terrestrial vertebrates on the planet. The recovery from the Chicxulub impact was not quick. Paleontological evidence suggests that it took approximately 3 to 4 million years for terrestrial ecosystems to fully recover to pre-impact levels of diversity and complexity. Some regions recovered faster, others bore the scars of the impact for far longer. But recover they did, and the world that emerged from the impact winter was profoundly different from the one that had been destroyed. The first period of the new era, the Paleocene, was, by the standards of the world that came before, impoverished. The great forests of the Cretaceous had been reduced to pioneering ferns and early flowering plants. The dominant large animals were strange, unfamiliar creatures: early ungulates, large ground birds, primitive primates. But it was also a world of extraordinary opportunity. Every ecological niche that the dinosaurs had held for 165 million years was now vacant. And evolution, given time and opportunity, fills vacuums. The mammals seized the moment with extraordinary speed, in geological terms. Within 10 million years of the impact, mammals had already diversified into forms that would be recognizable as the ancestors of modern horses, elephants, and whales. Within 20 million years, the first primates had appeared. Within 66 million years, the blink of an eye in geological time, one lineage of those primates had developed the capacity to look back at the rock record, find the thin layer of iridium-rich clay, and piece together what had happened. The Chicxulub impact site continues to yield new data. In 2016, an international drilling project extracted cores from directly beneath the crater's central peak, the uplifted ring of rock that forms the heart of the impact structure. These cores revealed something remarkable. Within the first meter of rock deposited after the impact, representing the first few decades of recovery, life had already returned. Single-celled organisms, then simple multicellular life, then more complex forms. The pace of recovery was faster than many scientists had expected. Life, it appears, is extraordinarily difficult to extinguish entirely. Even the most catastrophic event in 66 million years could not fully sterilize the ocean. The survivors were always there, waiting, in the sediment, in the deep water, in the cracks of rocks. The Chicxulub impact is the most studied geological event in Earth's history. Thousands of scientific papers, dozens of major drilling projects, entire careers devoted to understanding a single day 66 million years ago. And the more we study it, the more we understand that it is not simply a story about what was lost, though what was lost was staggering. It is also a story about what the history of life on Earth actually looks like when viewed without the comforting assumption that progress is inevitable. The dinosaurs were not failures. They were not evolutionary dead ends. They were the most successful large animals in the history of terrestrial life, by almost any measure you care to apply. They were ended not by their own weaknesses, but by an event that no amount of evolutionary sophistication could have prepared any animal for. The universe, as the fossil record makes abundantly clear, does not guarantee the survival of even the greatest dynasties. And yet, and this is perhaps the most important thing, life continued. It always has, through the end-Permian extinction, which killed over 90% of all species on Earth, through the End-Devonian, the End-Ordovician, and all the smaller extinctions in between. Life has survived every catastrophe this planet has experienced, not unchanged, never unchanged, but it has survived. Every bird you have ever seen is a dinosaur. Every time a crow solves a puzzle, or a parrot speaks a word, or a hawk falls from the sky in a perfect stoop, you are watching the continuation of a lineage that survived the worst day in the last 66 million years. The dinosaurs are gone, but they were here. For 165 million years they were here, and because of what they left behind, in the fossil record, in the rock, and in the birds that carry their legacy forward, we can know them. We can study them, understand them, tell their story. That is what we will do every week on Jurassic Era. If this documentary gave you something, a new perspective, a deeper understanding, or simply the feeling of having spent time in a world far older and stranger than our own, then subscribe to Jurassic Era. New documentaries upload every week. Next episode, we go back further, to the very beginning. To the Triassic period, 250 million years ago, when the dinosaurs first appeared on a world still scarred by the greatest extinction in Earth's history, how they rose, why they won, and what the world looked like before they arrived. The story of life on Earth is longer and stranger than any of us were taught. We are only just beginning.